Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Green Man channel. Hope you're all doing good and well for this Halloween's Eve tier list. And I did the Final Girls tier list a couple of weeks ago, so I thought it's only fair to even things out a bit and to do a Final Boys tier list. I mean, the Final Girl thing is very much a horror film trope. Wasn't quite as easy to think of a Final Boys tier list. I have to say, I did get some help from Screen Rant and produce this list of characters, including a handful of my own choices here as well, I think. And yeah, so we've got a list of Final Boys to go into tiers. The tier categories are the same as they were for the Final Girls tier list. You've got Icon, Warrior, Underrated, Leave It to the Fate, or Leave It to Fate, and Leave It to the Killer. And those are all pretty self-explanatory by this point. If you saw the other tier list, everyone I like the best, all the Final Boys I like the best will go into Icon. The ones I like the least will go into Leave It to the Killer, and everything else, everyone else will be in the other categories in between those two. So here we are. Here we've got the list of all the images of the Final Boys from all these movies. We start with David Drayton from The Mist. David Drayton is, I think, he has a real testing time in this film right up until the end. And if you know what happens at the end of The Mist, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I think he's actually a good leader. I think he's really trying hard to rally people together to get them to try to work out this incredibly difficult situation, not to let them be overcome by fear and to make the wrong decisions or to become selfish. And he really tries to still make people stick together and to work together. But despite that, he comes up against so many challenges. And for me, he does admirably well right up until, what happens at the end, which, I mean, it's just an incredibly dark ending to this film. For me, he's not quite an icon. Maybe it's because of what he does right at the end. But then again, could he have done, if you were in that situation? It's a very difficult one. But I think he's a warrior at least, because he makes some admirable, I think he really does try throughout that film to do the right things. And he's quite an actual, pretty good depth to his character as well. Now we have Mack from McCready from The Thing. And, one of my all-time favorite Final Boys. I think you're going to know what my decision is going to be here. He's going to go into Icon. The situation is absolutely awful. They've got this unknown quantity that they're dealing with the Thing, and all the highly kind of how infectious it is, and that they're all trying to overcome. Again, it's about overcoming fears and trying to work together. And there's a scene where he actually kills one of his colleagues or comrades, because they're coming at him when he's trying to work out, what the next best thing I think is to do. And probably because out of fear of being infected or something, he ends up killing him. But it feels like, I think it's Clark that he kills. But that's an incredibly difficult decision that he's had to make there. I think he's just iconic in the way he leads, and everything he does, he's willing to make the difficult decisions for everybody in that situation. And I think, again, a bit like David Drayton, but I think that Mack is, because of the Thing status, maybe it makes him that bit more iconic because the Thing is iconic. But I do love Kurt Russell as Mack as well, and all of that together just makes me think it's just too, I cannot put him in any other category other than icon. Next up, we have Charles from The Thing. Now, I think he really challenges the authority of Mack, and I think he's sometimes pretty, he's not doing a lot himself to help the situation or to really try to work out, what the next best step is when you're faced with this awful entity. And for me, I kind of think he grows on me a bit as the film goes on, but I'm going to say Leave It to Fate for Charles. I don't think he's very helpful in that situation with what he does. And, for me, Mack is the sort of real iconic character, although they're both final boys at the end of The Thing, of course. Next up is Alex from Final Destination. Yeah, Alex is someone I've spoken about recently on my Final Destination films ranking. I think he's a bit underrated. I think he's really tries, he gets, he clearly has a lot of anxiety and he really shows that quite a bit in this film, in this first Final Destination film. But that's kind of what I like about him as well. I think it's a bit underrated because he doesn't often get mentions. I don't often hear Alex spoken about, for whatever reason. And I do think that he's got some depth to his character and he's a bit of a survivor, as he evidences in that first film. So, yeah, he's going into underrated for me. Next up, we have Andy from Child's Play. And this is a little bit tricky because I haven't seen all of the Child's Play films yet. But what I have seen him in, I've liked. I really like the performance, actually, of Alex Vincent, who I think is the actor that plays Andy. And I love the way he says, Chucky. It's great. And yeah, he's pretty for a kid, though, right? This kid in the first film, right, he's very resilient, I actually think, and really quite brave. I think he's a bit of a warrior. I mean, I may get some people coming at me about that, but honestly, I think he's actually a bit of a warrior, is Andy from Child's Play. From what I've seen of him, he's going into warrior. So there we go. Now, Arkin from The Collector. Now, similar sort of reasons that if you remember the Final Girls tier list, there was a final girl on that. I think it was Rocky from Don't Breathe, who I, pretty much instantly put into Leave It to the Killer because she's a criminal. Now, I have realized that that's a little bit hypocritical because there's somebody else I think that I'm going to come to who is a bit of a criminal, but I'm not maybe going to put in that category, and I have to explain myself there as I get to that. But Arkin for me is still a Leave It to the Killer. For similar reasons that I put Rocky in. And I don't quite think that I get enough from him to save him from that category. But the person I'm going to come to later, who I think has just a few more qualities to his character, I will explain later on why, he's still, I think. Anyway, I'll be coming to him shortly, so I'll get on to him shortly. Next up, we've got Cooper from Event Horizon. Definitely an underrated one for me, actually. He kind of wears his heart on his sleeve. He says exactly what he's thinking, which gets him into trouble sometimes. But that's what I like about his character. I think he's a bit of a standout in Event Horizon as well because he says funny one-liners and stuff. And I like him. I think he's just as he is what he is. And he really tries to survive in that situation, Event Horizon, with the crazy doctor guy that Sam Weir plays. So I think he's underrated, Cooper. I'm going to put him underrated. Now we have Hicks from Aliens. Now, going back years and years, I've always liked Hicks as a character. I like the way him and Ripley support each other. He's sort of the understated one. He's the quiet one. But that doesn't mean that he's still not a pretty good leader, I think. And just love the way he stays calm in all of the chaos that unfolds throughout Aliens, and also the way he backs up Ripley. And then I also love the way Ripley backs him up as well in a few spots in the film too. And like a bit of a dream team for me in that film. And as someone who loves that film, and also, Ripley's an absolute icon for me. There was part of me that was thinking maybe I shouldn't put Hicks into icon, but you know what? Screw it. I think he is kind of iconic. I think he's a great character in that film. And, paired up with Ripley, they make a great team. And, he does survive. I do think I can call him a final guy because he does survive right to the end. I know what happens at the start of Alien 3, but that's not until Alien 3, I think. So, yeah, Hicks is an icon to me. He's a hero. Come on. He's a hero, right? And next up, we've got Dutch from Predator. For me, actually, one of Arnold Schwarzenegger's more nuanced performances. And I quite, I know it's not exactly, necessarily an Oscar worthy, Arnie is Arnie, right? And he is very typecast into these kind of roles, particularly in the 80s. And, but Predator, I actually really like his performance. Yes, he is doing what he does best in some respects as the kind of macho hero. But I like the little things he does in this film. I think Arnie sometimes is a little bit underrated as a performer, and in this film in particular, I think he's a bit underrated. I don't necessarily think he's great in all the films. Don't get me wrong, but in Predator, he's good. He's good, and he's iconic as Dutch in Predator. So Dutch is going into icon for me. Next up, we've got Jesse from A Nightmare on Elm Street 2. He goes through an awful lot in this film, and anyone that deals with or has to deal with Freddy, I think immediately goes up a couple of tiers for me. And certainly, you know, he goes through a lot in this film. I think he's kind of underrated, therefore. And I do like his character, actually, Jesse, in this film, and I like everything about what Nightmare on Elm Street is, and that it does subvert expectations somewhat, and I like that about it. So yeah, I like Jesse quite a bit. I think he's underrated. I wouldn't put him higher, though, I don't think, than the underrated category. Next up we have Paxton from Hostel. Somebody that, you know, if I only saw the first half of Hostel as a movie, Paxton would probably go in to Leave It to the Killer, because he's a bit obnoxious. You know, he's just being a bit of a brat in the first half of that film, a bit of a lad, I suppose, right? And he doesn't really win you over at all until the point of when he's facing his torturer. But from that point onwards, it's like you feel a bit of a U-turn. I had a U-turn about this guy, this character. I'm like, you know what? He's really fighting for his life, and the way he's fighting for his life, and then fighting for someone else's life later on, the girl, I think is quite, you know, the guy's balls. You know, Paxton has big balls to do what he did in this film. So he's going into Warrior for me, because that amazing transformation for me in his character, where you saw that he's more than just what he was. I mean, to be honest, as I say, if it was just the first kind of 45, 50 minutes of that film that I saw, Paxton would be in Leave It to the Killer. But because of that sort of last sequence or the last scenes, he's in Warrior, because I just think he gets, you know, he shows true character towards the end of that movie for me. But he's not an icon. I wouldn't go that far. Next up, we have Kazan from Cube. I really like Kazan, actually. He's autistic, and he has a very challenging situation with these other people, not all of them particularly trustworthy. Quentin. And, you know, very memorable film for me, cult status, cult classic. And I do like Kazan, and I love that he actually manages to get to the end as well. I think it's great. So he's going into underrated for me. I will never forget when Quentin goes, Red Kazan, and it's just really creepy and just weird when he does that. Anyway, next up we've got Luke from The Ritual. Now, The Ritual, I think, was a really good film. I enjoyed it quite a bit, but I struggled to remember much about Luke's character, which to me says something. I haven't watched it in a while, and perhaps it's a little bit unfair because this is a film I've not seen in a while. I have seen it, but not in a while. So it's kind of hard for me to really, truly judge Luke. I'm just going to put him in Leave It to Fate, partly for that reason, but also because, you know, if this character was really great, I would think I would remember him more. So I'm just going to put him in Leave It to Fate for that reason, although I'm sure he could be a bit underrated as well. So maybe he straddles between those two categories as well. Next up, we've got Marty from, he's the kind of stone guy from the Cabin in the Woods film. And he's actually kind of, you know, he's so offbeat and eccentric, and just, you know, says what's pretty much some very strange things, but it gives the film a bit more character than it otherwise would have, because I don't think the other characters in that film are actually that interesting, whereas he is actually, you listen to what he's saying when he says it. And because he's very striking as a character. So I think he's underrated at least. He's also a little bit of a warrior, if I remember right, as the film goes on. But I'm going to stick him in underrated for now. I think he's a pretty underrated final boy. Next up, we have Ash from Evil Dead. I think I would be, I think a lot of people would come at me if I didn't put Ash in iconic. He has to be fair, from the Evil Dead films. I am yet to find out which in my poll which film is going to win, or rather which franchise is going to win for when I do my next film ranking of a particular horror franchise. And it may be Evil Dead has won that poll, but we shall see. And I think Ash is pretty iconic. I mean, these films are totally nuts. I think of the first Evil Dead as well, and just everything he's kind of going through, and just it's all completely off the wall stuff. But that's kind of how Ash kind of thrives in the film, is from everything being over the top and completely just, yeah, bananas. But yeah, Ash, I think it's fair to say, is an icon. Next up, we have Nick from House of Wax. Now, this is the guy that I was talking about earlier when I was also talking about Arkin. Because really, I think he's a bad boy, right? He's a bad boy, is Nick. I do believe at the start they talk about some of his, he's done some criminal activity and that kind of thing. And I'm always a bit like, well, in that case, right, he should probably be in the bottom tier, because I don't really want to put criminals in like one of the top tiers for sure. The thing is with Nick, I think he is awesome, right? The way he fights with the crossbow against these psychopaths who are worse criminals. To be fair, they are worse criminals than him, I think. You know, I'd have to remember what crimes Nick has actually committed at the start of the film, but he's pretty heroic and brave, and he's protecting his sister, and actually she's protecting him sometimes. They're working together, to be fair, as a team, both he and his sister, Carly. But I think my point is that his curve throughout the film is like, it's a great trajectory. I think that's the word I was looking for, trajectory. It's a great trajectory, and I kind of like Nick by the end of the movie, despite his back. And I don't necessarily like, so with Arkin and with Rocky, didn't quite feel that so much. So I actually think he's going to go as high as underrated. I probably wouldn't put Nick as any higher than that. But the film actually is a little bit underrated as well for me, House of Wax. I don't think it's as bad as some people say it is. As a slasher, it's actually not bad at all. And there are some pretty good horror moments in that film too. So yeah, Nick, underrated. There you go. Was that a surprise? I don't know. Anyway, thanks everybody for watching. As always, do appreciate it. You follow me and everything. So there we go. We got 4 icons this time. We got Mack, Hicks, Dutch, and Ash, all in the iconic category. And looking back at this, I think, yep, those are my icons. Warriors, not so many in the Warriors category this time. We got a lot of them, quite a few in the underrated category, but David Drayton, Andy from Child's Play, and Paxton from Hostel are my Warriors. And then we got the underrated tier, which is the busiest tier here, with Alex from Final Destination, Jesse from A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Cooper from Event Horizon, Kazan from Cube, Marty from the Cabin in the Woods, and Nick from House of Wax. And we got the ones I've kind of left to fate. You know, not too bothered either way, to be honest. Luke from The Ritual and Charles from The Thing. And then Arkin is the only one in Leave It to the Killer. So thanks very much all for watching. As always, until next time, don't forget to drop a like and sub if you're new to the channel. Otherwise, for me, take care, everybody, and bye for now.